Welcome to a new episode. Before we begin, I'd love to know a little about you. In the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how these stories reach people in different corners of the world at different hours of the day or night. And if you enjoy these calm explorations, subscribing is the easiest way to join me again whenever you feel like drifting into something thoughtful. Now, let's imagine a world before clocks, before glowing screens, before the tick of minutes divided the night. When darkness fell, life followed a rhythm set not by alarms, but by the slow arc of the sun, the flicker of firelight, and the distant shine of stars. Streets emptied, houses dimmed, and silence spread, broken only by the sound of animals, the creak of wood, or a voice in prayer. In that world, night was not a single block of sleep, but a softer, more open landscape, with pauses, waking moments, and drifting dreams. Tonight, we'll wander into that forgotten science of sleep. For most of us today, sleep seems like a single, unbroken stretch of time. We close our eyes, drift off, and hope not to stir until morning. But this modern pattern, the so-called 8 hours of solid sleep, is not the way human beings always lived. In fact, for centuries across Europe, and in many other parts of the world, people spoke casually of something very different: the first sleep and the second sleep. This older rhythm, sometimes called segmented or biphasic sleep, shaped nights for hundreds of years, right up until the early modern period. Evidence comes from sources as varied as court documents, diaries, medical treatises, and even literature. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, the phrase first sleep appears again and again, almost always without explanation, suggesting it was simply common knowledge, something everyone understood. The historian Roger E. Kirch, in his monumental study At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, gathered more than 500 references to segmented sleep across centuries. He found examples in English, French, Italian, and Latin texts, all describing a night divided into 2 distinct rests. People would go to bed not long after dusk, sleep for several hours, wake for an hour or two, and then fall back asleep until dawn. This wasn't a quirk or an anomaly. It was the standard expectation of the night. Think of it. The day ended not with 8 hours of darkness, but with 2 acts, 2 intervals of dreams separated by a gentle waking. It was almost as if the night itself breathed. Descriptions of first sleep appear in medieval medical texts where physicians advised patients to time their remedies, meals, or even bloodletting between the 2 periods of rest. A 15th century French physician, writing about digestion, suggested that the body's processes worked best after the first sleep. In Chaucer's time, Englishmen spoke of the firste slep as if it were as familiar as breakfast. Court records from the 16th century in England show witnesses testifying about events that happened after first sleep, a way of marking time in the night, much as we might say, around midnight. In one case, a woman recalled leaving her house during that waking period, only to encounter trouble in the street. The judge recorded her words without confusion. Everyone in the room knew exactly what she meant. Literature holds traces as well. In Cervantes's Don Quixote, 1605, characters refer to waking after the first sleep as the natural course of the night. In medieval prayers and hymns, monks designed vigils to fit neatly into that middle interval when lay people might be awake and reflective. So, what did people do in those waking hours? Far from tossing and turning in frustration, they often used the time purposefully. The interval between first and second sleep, sometimes called the watch, became a natural, expected part of daily life. Some prayed. In Catholic Europe, priests encouraged devotion in these hours, even suggesting that God heard prayers more clearly in the silence of the night. Manuals of piety advised husbands and wives to use the wakeful time for quiet reflection or to recite psalms. Others read, if they could afford candles. A 17th century English diary describes a man rising after first sleep to read scripture by the hearth, his family stirring in the shadows. Letters of the period mention neighbors visiting one another during the watch, a practice that seems strange today, but made sense in communities where the night was long and social bonds were close. And yes, intimacy. Many sources suggest that couples often made love during this waking period, believing it was the most fertile time. Medical writers of the early modern era recommended intercourse after the first sleep, when the body was refreshed but not yet heavy with the final drowsiness of morning. It is almost comical to imagine, not the groggy fumbling of midnight, but a culturally sanctioned interlude, a time marked out for connection. For the poor, especially those with livestock, the waking period was practical. They might check on animals, stoke fires, mend tools by lamplight, or prepare dough for baking at dawn. For them, the watch was woven into the fabric of survival. This segmented pattern made nights less rigid, more open. Darkness was not a blank, inert span to be endured, but a canvas on which many small activities could unfold. Anthropologists studying non-industrial societies today have observed similar rhythms. Among the Tiv people of Nigeria, for instance, nighttime waking is expected. Families rise to talk, smoke, or share food before returning to sleep. In Madagascar, villagers sometimes describe sleep as something that comes in installments, with pauses that allow for storytelling or community exchange. Such practices remind us that sleep is not only biological, but cultural. The body may have natural rhythms that lean toward two phases, especially when exposed to long nights without artificial light. But culture interprets those rhythms, fills them with meaning, and passes them down. One might wonder why people slept this way. Why not simply collapse into one long slumber? The answer seems to lie partly in biology. When humans are exposed only to natural light, as experiments in the 1990s confirmed, many spontaneously fall into segmented sleep. In these studies, subjects kept in conditions of extended darkness often drifted into a first sleep of about 4 hours, woke for 1 or 2, then returned for a second sleep until morning. It seems our circadian rhythm, without the constant push of artificial light, divides the night naturally. The hormone melatonin surges in the early evening, leading to the first sleep. Then it dips in the middle of the night, leaving the body alert for a short while. Finally, it rises again toward dawn, pulling the body back into rest. For our ancestors, this wasn't a problem. It was simply the shape of the night. Unlike us, they did not interpret a midnight awakening as insomnia. They didn't reach for pills, or toss restlessly, or curse the ceiling. They simply lived with it, used it, perhaps even cherished it. The depth of this practice is revealed in language. In French, premier sommeil carried the same weight as first sleep in English. Italian records speak of primo sonno. In Latin documents, phrases like primum somnum appear as time markers. The recurrence across cultures suggests a widespread shared understanding. Legal cases reinforce this. In the Scottish Highlands, testimony about events after the first sleep was accepted as precise. In an Italian trial from the 17th century, a witness described seeing a crime committed during the waking interval. No one questioned the phrase. It was as fixed in the collective mind as afternoon or sunset. Even proverbs carried traces. In parts of France, people would say, "Let me tell you a story before second sleep," a kind of shorthand for the quiet intimacy of the middle hours. We might imagine a medieval village settling into its first sleep. Fires dimmed, animals resting, children curled beneath rough blankets. Then, hours later, doors creak open. A few figures step into the cool air, lanterns glowing faintly. Inside, someone kneels in prayer. Another stirs coals to heat a drink. A mother nurses a child. In another house, a man sharpens a tool for morning work. The night was not absolute. It was porous, layered, inhabited. This way of life endured for centuries, persisting into the 18th and even early 19th centuries. But eventually, it began to fade. The reason for its disappearance lies not in biology, but in history, in the brightening of the night through technology and the tightening of schedules through industry. That story belongs to another part of our journey. For now, it is enough to remember that sleep itself has a history, and that the way we rest today is not inevitable, but one possibility among many. For as long as human beings have closed their eyes at night, we have dreamed. And for much of history, dreams were not treated as random fragments of the unconscious, but as messages, significant, symbolic, sometimes divine. Before Freud, before the rise of psychology in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, dreams carried weight in culture, in religion, and in daily life. They were seen as windows into the soul, or even as a kind of correspondence from beyond. In the ancient world, civilizations across the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Asia all regarded dreams with deep seriousness. The Bible alone contains more than 100 references to dreams. Jacob dreamt of a ladder reaching into heaven. Joseph of Egypt interpreted Pharaoh's dreams of fat and lean cows as prophecy of abundance and famine. In the New Testament, Joseph, husband of Mary, was visited in dreams by angels who guided him to protect the infant Jesus. These were not vague curiosities. They were moments of revelation, treated with the gravity of divine communication. A dream could alter history. The Greeks and Romans placed dreams within a vast landscape of omens and signs. Physicians in the Hippocratic tradition even used dreams diagnostically, believing that certain recurring dream images reflected imbalances in the body's humors. If a patient dreamt of flooding waters, it might indicate an excess of phlegm. Dreams of fire might suggest too much bile. The boundaries between medicine and spirituality blurred easily. One of the most extraordinary early attempts to organize dream knowledge came in the 2nd century CE, when a Greek writer named Artemidorus of Daldis composed a 5-volume work known as the Oneirokritika, literally, the interpretation of dreams. Artemidorus gathered and classified hundreds of dream accounts, describing common images, symbols, and their supposed meanings. If you dreamt of birds, it might signify freedom or travel. If you dreamt of losing teeth, it might portend the loss of relatives. The Oneirokritika was less mystical than systematic. Artemidorus interviewed people, collected reports, and tried to map the patterns of the dream world. In a sense, it was an early scientific attempt to catalogue the unconscious, centuries before Freud would take up the same title. Medieval Europe inherited these traditions, but reframed them through Christianity. Dreams could be divine revelations, but they could also be dangerous temptations. St. Augustine, in the 4th and 5th centuries, warned that dreams could come not only from God, but from demons. The devil, he argued, might slip into sleep to tempt believers with visions of lust or false prophecy. For monks and theologians, the night was a battleground of the soul. Despite these warnings, medieval people often sought meaning in their dreams. Pilgrims traveled to shrines where saints were believed to send visions. Kings and queens sometimes acted on the advice of dreams, treating them as a form of counsel. Chroniclers recorded episodes in which a monarch's dream foretold victory or disaster. In 1170, before the murder of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, several people reported ominous dreams of blood and violence. To a medieval mind, these were not coincidences, but signs woven into the fabric of God's plan. Folklore across Europe is full of dream lore, simple rules and interpretations passed from parent to child. To dream of a wedding was often considered an omen of death. To dream of falling meant the devil was tugging at your soul. to dream of fish was a sign of pregnancy. The logic was often symbolic: water linked to fertility, falling to danger, teeth to mortality. Even without a theological framework, dreams became a way of rehearsing meaning in a precarious world. Not all societies treated dreams the same way. In many indigenous cultures around the world, dreams were seen not as illusions, but as encounters with other realms of reality. Among the Iroquois of North America, dreams were thought to express the hidden desires of the soul, and failing to fulfill a dream's wish was believed to bring harm. Dream sharing became a social practice, a way of maintaining balance within the community. In Aboriginal Australian traditions, the dreaming is not simply the content of nightly visions, but the very framework of existence, the timeless spiritual layer that underlies reality itself. For these cultures, sleep was not escape, but entry into a deeper truth. Returning to Europe, the Middle Ages and Renaissance saw a flourishing of dream books, cheaply printed collections of symbols and their interpretations. These texts often claimed ancient authority, invoking Artemidorus or Arabic scholars like Ahmet, but they circulated widely as popular guides. A peasant or a merchant could look up a dream of wolves, storms, or coins and find a ready-made explanation. They were a kind of psychological almanac, part of the same culture that consulted astrological charts and herbal remedies. Dreams also played a role in law and justice. Court testimonies occasionally reference dreams as legitimate evidence of intent or divine warning. In Icelandic sagas, a dream might predict betrayal or war, shaping the actions of entire communities. Even in more skeptical circles, the possibility that a dream might reveal truth could not be dismissed. By the early modern period, with the growth of humanism and the scientific revolution, attitudes toward dreams began to shift. Philosophers like René Descartes wondered whether dreams and waking life could be reliably distinguished at all. His famous thought experiment, "How can I know that I am not dreaming?" turned the dream into a philosophical problem of certainty. If our senses can deceive us in dreams, how do we trust them when we are awake? Dreams became less a message from the gods and more a puzzle about reality itself. In medicine too, the explanation of dreams slowly migrated from the divine to the physiological. The 17th century physician Thomas Willis, one of the founders of neurology, proposed that dreams arose from movements of animal spirits in the brain during sleep. Though the language seems quaint today, it marked a crucial step. Dreams were no longer the whispers of angels or demons, but the workings of the body and mind. Still, popular belief lagged behind. Ordinary people continued to interpret dreams as omens. A bride might fear a bad dream before her wedding. Farmers consulted dream books alongside weather lore. Superstitions endured well into the 19th century. It was only with the industrial era and the rise of psychology that dreams began to be studied in the sense we recognize today, as reflections of the psyche rather than prophecies of the future. Yet even then, the old ways lingered. Freud's interpretation of dreams, published in 1899, did not arrive in a vacuum. It inherited millennia of human fascination, from biblical prophecy to Artemidorus's catalogues, from medieval monks to folklore. What Freud called the royal road to the unconscious was paved long before him. His innovation was to turn the gaze inward, to see dreams not as messages from outside forces, but as coded expressions of the dreamer's own mind. Looking back, there is a kind of poetry in how dreams were once treated. Imagine waking in a medieval house, chilled in the night, recalling a vivid vision. Perhaps you dreamt of a great fire, or of a river breaking its banks. You might rise and pray, fearing divine wrath. Or you might tell your family, who nod gravely, interpreting the vision as a warning. In that moment, the dream was not just private fantasy. It was part of the social and spiritual fabric. Everyone understood that dreams mattered. Modern neuroscience tells us that dreams are generated during rapid eye movement sleep, with bursts of neural activity replaying fragments of memory, emotion, and sensation. But that does not erase the long centuries when a dream was as real as the sound of a church bell or the flight of a raven overhead. Those who lived before clocks and electric light navigated the night with tools very different from ours, and dreams were among the most powerful of those tools. It is tempting to think we are more rational now, freed from superstition. But even today, people wake shaken from nightmares, or comforted by a dream of a lost loved one. We search for meaning, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly. A dream can still make us pause at breakfast, or linger in thought long after the day has begun. Perhaps the difference is not that we no longer believe, but that we have given belief a new vocabulary, shifting from angels to neurons, from prophecy to psychology. The hunger for meaning remains. The forgotten science of sleep before clocks was not just about when people closed their eyes, but about how they interpreted the strange landscapes that came to them in the dark. In dreams, the world was porous, the veil thin, and messages seemed to flow freely from gods, spirits, or the hidden self. To study these dreams is to glimpse a humanity that lived more closely with mystery, more willing to let the night speak. Before the coming of gaslight and electricity, the night was a very different world. Darkness arrived slowly, stretching over the horizon with the setting sun, and once it fell, life was shaped by its weight. Pre-industrial societies did not resist this darkness so much as adapt to it, letting their rhythms rise and fall with firelight, with the seasons, and with the tasks of survival. Sleep, in this setting, was flexible. It bent to the environment in a way that our regimented schedules rarely allow today. Agrarian communities in particular lived by cycles of light and shadow. Farmers rose with dawn and often retired not long after dusk, yet the timing was never fixed. In summer, when days stretched long, work could last late into the evening. In winter, when darkness claimed much of the day, rest came earlier and lasted longer. A long winter night might leave room for 2 stretches of sleep, broken by a period of wakefulness. In many villages, this was not considered unusual but natural, a rhythm of the body aligning with the broader rhythm of the earth. Firelight governed much of what people could or could not do. In households wealthy enough to afford candles or oil lamps, the night could be stretched, pushing back against the dark for reading, sewing, or quiet gatherings. But for most, fire was precious, and flames were not left burning casually. A few glowing embers might be coaxed to life for warmth or necessity, but people lived intimately with the dark. It was not only an absence of light, but a presence in itself, full of silence, uncertainty, and, at times, awe. The moon was an unacknowledged clock. Lunar cycles influenced everything from travel to festivals, and they subtly shaped sleep as well. A bright, full moon allowed for later activity. Villagers might continue work outside, travelers could walk safely along paths, and communities sometimes chose the brightest nights for celebrations. In contrast, the new moon brought deep blackness, and with it, earlier rest. Before artificial light, the phases of the moon had a far more practical significance, weaving their way into the body's sense of timing. Accounts from the early modern period reveal how nights changed with the seasons and the moon. In winter, long nights encouraged extended rest, yet that rest was seldom uniform. People might lie awake for a time, telling stories, praying, or listening to the sounds of the house settling around them. In summer, short nights and heavy labor often reduced sleep to a single stretch. Yet even then, napping in the heat of the afternoon was common, redistributing rest across the day. Sleep was not an immovable block, but a shifting arrangement negotiated with nature. Anthropologists studying traditional societies have found that this flexibility still exists in cultures less bound by industrial time. In Madagascar, Villagers sometimes describe sleep as coming in installments, with pauses for conversation, chores, or even socializing. Among the Tiv people of Nigeria, nighttime waking is so ordinary that families rise together for a while, smoke, talk, or share food before returning to rest. In some Amazonian communities, people wake several times throughout the night, tending fires or children, without any sense that sleep has been broken. These patterns resemble the segmented sleep once widespread in Europe, suggesting that when left to itself, human rest tends toward variety, not uniformity. The historian A. Roger E. Kirsch has argued that without the pressure of mechanical time, pre-industrial sleep followed the body's natural cues. Melatonin levels rise in darkness, encouraging the first phase of sleep. After several hours, they dip, leaving the sleeper alert for a time before rising again toward morning. Rather than resisting this natural awakening, people embraced it. They prayed, worked quietly, or spoke with family. It was not considered insomnia, but part of the architecture of the night. Dreams, too, found a place in these interludes. Some reports describe families sharing dreams with one another during wakeful intervals, interpreting them in light of religion or folklore. A bad dream might prompt prayer, a pleasant one might inspire hope for the day ahead. In this way, the night was not a monolith, but a dialogue with the body, the household, and even the unseen world. Candles altered this rhythm only slowly. Beeswax candles were expensive, reserved for churches or the wealthy, while tallow candles, made from animal fat, smoked and smelled, making them less desirable for constant use. For most households, the cost of light limited how much the night could be bent. A candle consumed itself quickly. To leave one burning was to burn money. This created a relationship to darkness that modern people can hardly imagine, one in which every flame had weight and consequence. The interplay of moonlight, firelight, and seasonal change produced a night that was varied and alive. A winter night in northern Europe might last 14 hours, encouraging 2 periods of sleep with a generous waking interval. A summer night might last barely 6, urging people to rest in shorter stretches and make up the difference with midday naps. Across the year, sleep flexed and bent, never entirely detached from the turning of the earth. This flexibility extended beyond the individual to the entire community. In many villages, the sound of activity in the middle of the night was not considered unusual. A neighbor stoking a fire, a farmer checking on livestock, or a woman preparing bread before dawn were part of the shared rhythm. People understood that sleep was not absolute silence, but part of a living fabric in which others stirred and moved. The boundary between day and night was porous, shaped by necessity as much as by biology. When we picture the past, it is tempting to imagine the night as uniform, households shuttered, people collapsed in exhaustion. But the evidence suggests a more nuanced reality. Sleep was abundant, but not always continuous. Night carried within it layers of rest and wakefulness, reflection and activity. In a world without clocks, time was measured by natural signals, the fading of light, the crowing of roosters, the angle of the stars, the weight of fatigue itself. Perhaps most striking is how little anxiety surrounded this fractured pattern. Where today, a midnight awakening often brings frustration, glances at the clock, a sense of failure to achieve proper sleep. In the pre-industrial world, such waking was expected. It was an opportunity rather than a problem. This reveals how much of our experience of sleep is cultural as well as biological. What we treat as pathology may once have been ordinary life. Imagining a winter night in the 16th century, one can almost feel the rhythm. Families bundled together in a single bed or across pallets of straw, warmth shared against the cold. Hours pass in the dark until someone stirs. The fire is coaxed alive, a cup of ale is poured, quiet talk murmurs in the dark. Perhaps a neighbor knocks on the door, needing help with an animal, or simply company in the silence. After a while, weariness returns. Bodies settle again, and second sleep begins, carrying them gently toward dawn. This world was not entirely free of fear. The night could also conceal danger, both real and imagined. Wolves prowled, thieves crept, and supernatural beings were thought to wander. But within households and communities, the rhythm of segmented and flexible rest was a familiar comfort. It was a way of inhabiting time that suited the natural order, shaped by forces larger than human invention. When we step outside artificial light today, far from cities, into a countryside night filled only with moon and stars, we taste a fragment of that older rhythm. Our bodies, too, may find themselves stirring in the darkness, alert when we expect to be still. Pre-industrial nights remind us that sleep is not a fixed rule, but a dialogue with the world around us, one that our ancestors navigated with quiet adaptability, guided by firelight, by seasons, and by the slow turning of the moon. The transformation of sleep began not with a change in biology, but with a change in history. As cities grew and industries rose, the natural rhythms of the night were gradually replaced by artificial ones. The invention of gaslight in the late 18th century and its spread through the 19th brought an unprecedented brightness to the dark. Streets that had once fallen silent after dusk now flickered with a steady glow. Shops stayed open later, theaters extended their performances, and people began to push the boundaries of night itself. Gaslight made evenings productive. It allowed factories to operate beyond daylight hours, keeping workers on the floor long into the night. And though many celebrated this new freedom, it came with a cost. The long intervals of rest that had once seemed natural began to feel inefficient. Where once it had been acceptable to sleep in 2 phases, rising in the middle of the night to pray, read, or visit neighbors, industrial life demanded consolidation. If one's day was determined by the factory bell or the railway timetable, the luxury of a midnight waking no longer fit. Sleep had to be packed tightly into the hours left over from work. The arrival of electric light in the late 19th century accelerated the shift. Thomas Edison himself argued that sleep was wasteful, claiming that humans ought to minimize it in the name of productivity. With electric bulbs glowing steadily, night was no longer dark, and the body's old cues grew muted. The biological dip that once encouraged wakefulness between first and second sleep was overrun by a new demand: stay asleep, stay efficient, and rise ready for labor. The industrial city pulsed with a tempo set by machines, not by melatonin. By the mid-19th century, the idea of a single, unbroken 8 hours of sleep had taken hold. Campaigns for the rights of workers often adopted the slogan, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. It was a rallying cry for balance, but it also fixed sleep into a rigid block, standardized like the factory shifts it resisted. Rest became a commodity, a unit to be measured, optimized, and managed. This industrial framework reshaped how people thought about sleep itself. What had once been ordinary, waking in the night, began to look suspicious. Doctors and medical writers started describing it as a disorder. By the late 19th century, medical journals carried articles about sleep maintenance insomnia, the problem of waking in the night and struggling to return to rest. The irony is that this problem was for centuries the norm. But in a society newly obsessed with efficiency, any deviation from a full night's rest was recast as pathology. The change was reinforced by urban life. In crowded industrial cities, where workers lived in cramped housing near factories, the environment was less conducive to natural rhythms. Noise from the streets, shifts that demanded waking before dawn, and the constant hum of machinery left little room for the old flexibility. Sleep had to be done in one go because there was no other time to do it. Even leisure activities bent to the new rhythm. Newspapers encouraged people to read in the evenings, theatres drew crowds under gaslight, and social gatherings pushed later into the night. The result was a compression of rest, squeezed into a standardized mold. There were critics, of course. Some writers mourned the disappearance of the gentle waking hours. Others warned that the new pace of life would exhaust the body and dull the mind. Yet the tide was too strong to resist. Electric light spread rapidly through cities, then into homes, until the darkness itself seemed to retreat. Where once the phases of the moon-shaped nights, the steady glare of bulbs erased those cycles. Time became mechanical, regulated by factory whistles, railway timetables, and clock towers. Sleep became mechanical too. This shift also altered dreams. In the old pattern, the waking period between sleeps offered a time to reflect on dreams, to share them with family, to weave them into meaning. But with uninterrupted sleep came a diminished space for that practice. Dreams still arrived, of course, but fewer people lingered over them in the quiet hours of night. The cultural fabric of sleep grew thinner, stripped of the rituals that once surrounded it. Science, meanwhile, sought to measure and classify. Sleep laboratories emerged in the early 20th century, timing phases of rest, recording brain activity, and producing definitions of normality and abnormality. In this context, segmented sleep appeared as an anomaly, something to be explained away. Physicians prescribed treatments to prevent nighttime waking, framing it as an obstacle to health and productivity. The natural became unnatural, and culture reshaped biology through expectation. It is striking to realize how recent this transformation is. Only 2 or 3 centuries ago, most of Europe still spoke of first sleep and second sleep. Today, the very phrase sounds strange, almost exotic. Industrialization rewrote the human night, and we have come to accept its script as if it were nature's own. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Our bodies still carry the older rhythm. Studies in environments without artificial light show people drifting naturally into 2 phases of rest. If you find yourself awake in the middle of the night, staring into the dark, you may not be broken at all. You may simply be closer to your ancestors than to Edison. The industrial shift did more than change how people slept. It reshaped how they imagined time itself. The night was no longer a space of breathing, with intervals of waking and rest, but a block to be conquered, compressed, and fitted into the gears of production. In that compression, something was lost. The intimacy of the midnight hour, the quiet reflections, the prayers and stories, the sense that night was alive with its own rhythm. All of these gave way to a culture that demanded efficiency, even in sleep. And yet, traces remain. In rural communities, in the habits of the elderly, or in those who live without the glare of constant light, segmented sleep still appears. It lingers like an echo of a forgotten age, reminding us that our modern expectations are not the only way to inhabit the night. In recent decades, science has turned its lens back toward sleep, and what it has discovered suggests that the industrial pattern of a single, unbroken night may not be as natural as we like to believe. Chronobiology, the study of biological rhythms, has shown that human beings are exquisitely sensitive to cycles of light and darkness, to the ebb and flow of hormones, to the ticking of an internal clock that runs just beneath the surface of daily life. When people are removed from the artificial glow of electric light and placed into environments shaped only by the rising and setting of the sun, their sleep patterns begin to shift. Experiments in the 1990s by psychiatrist Thomas Wehr demonstrated this dramatically. Volunteers lived in controlled darkness for 14 hours a night, simulating the length of a winter evening. Instead of sleeping straight through, many of them naturally fell into 2 phases, roughly 4 hours of rest, a period of quiet wakefulness, then another 4 hours of sleep. They were not restless or distressed. They simply drifted into a rhythm that echoed the segmented nights of the past. The body's internal clock appears to be designed for flexibility. Melatonin, the hormone that signals sleep, rises in the early evening, prompting the first drowsiness. Several hours later, its levels dip, creating a window of wakefulness. Toward dawn, melatonin rises again, pulling the body back into slumber. In a world without bright artificial light, this cycle seems to reveal itself clearly. It suggests that the old rhythm of first sleep and second sleep was not cultural invention alone, but biology expressed through culture. Modern research into biphasic and polyphasic sleep, sleeping in 2 or more phases across the day, has shown both advantages and drawbacks. On one hand, shorter stretches of sleep distributed throughout the day can refresh alertness, enhance creativity, and even improve memory consolidation. Some studies suggest that breaking sleep into phases allows the brain to revisit and strengthen different types of memory: declarative facts, emotional experiences, motor skills. Polyphasic schedules, which involve several short sleeps around the clock, have occasionally been used by explorers, military personnel, and even creative figures seeking to maximize their waking hours. But the costs are real. Extended polyphasic sleep, especially when driven by schedules rather than biology, often leads to sleep deprivation, mood disturbances, and cognitive decline. The human body may be flexible, but it is not infinitely so. Circadian rhythms, the roughly 24-hour cycles of hormones, temperature, and metabolism, push strongly toward one consolidated rest anchored by night. When that anchor is broken too often, health suffers. The immune system weakens, reaction times slow, and long-term risks such as cardiovascular disease and metabolic disorders increase. Biphasic sleep, however, seems more benign. A long stretch at night, followed by a shorter nap in the afternoon, is common in Mediterranean cultures, where the siesta persists. Studies of nap-taking show improvements in memory, stress reduction, and cardiovascular health. In this model, sleep remains roughly 8 hours total, but it is split into 2 blocks, one nocturnal, one diurnal. This pattern may be closer to what our ancestors knew: rest divided not only by the night's watch, but by the rhythms of work and heat across the day. What emerges from the research is not a rigid prescription, but a reminder of diversity. Sleep is not one size fits all. Some people thrive on a strict 8-hour night. Others find themselves naturally waking in the middle of the night, only to drift back to sleep later. For centuries, this would not have been considered a disorder. Today, it is often diagnosed as insomnia. Modern medicine sometimes frames what may be an older rhythm as pathology. The question remains: are we biologically closer to segmented sleep than to the continuous sleep demanded by industrial life? Evidence suggests we are capable of both, but segmented sleep may lie closer to our natural baseline. Without alarms, without screens, without the late-night glow of cities, our bodies often rediscover it. The wakeful interval in the middle of the night is not broken sleep, but part of a broader architecture of rest. It is a time when the brain may consolidate memory, process emotion, or generate the surreal landscapes of dreams. Creativity often flourishes in these moments. Writers, artists, and scientists have long described insights arriving in the stillness of the night. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was inspired by a dream she had after midnight. Paul McCartney famously said the melody of Yesterday came to him in sleep. The interval between sleeps, when the mind is relaxed but alert, may be especially fertile ground for imagination. Neuroscientists studying the hypnagogic state, that liminal zone between wakefulness and sleep, have found that it produces unusual associations and novel ideas. Perhaps our ancestors, rising after first sleep to reflect or create, were tapping into this wellspring without even naming it. At the same time, continuous sleep has its own advantages. Modern life, with its relentless schedules, favors predictability. A solid night of rest provides consistency for work, school, and social obligations. In a society built on synchronized time, segmented sleep can feel inconvenient. It resists the mechanical rhythm of the clock. This is one reason why, despite biology's leanings, the 8-hour block has become dominant. It is practical, if not always perfectly aligned with the body's natural ebb and flow. Research into circadian rhythms has also shown just how deeply light influences us. The blue wavelengths of morning sunlight reset the internal clock, anchoring the day. Artificial light at night, particularly from screens, confuses this system, delaying melatonin release and fragmenting rest. This is why many sleep researchers emphasize the importance of dark evenings and bright mornings, a pattern much closer to the pre-industrial experience of night and day. When people align themselves with natural light cycles, they often report more restorative sleep, sometimes even slipping into two-phase patterns without trying. The reflection that lingers is that sleep is both ancient and fragile. We carry within us the capacity for segmented nights, for afternoon naps, for the improvisation of rest. But we live in a world that asks for uniformity, where waking at 2 a.m. feels like failure instead of opportunity. Our ancestors might smile at this, wondering why we resist what the body offers so freely. Perhaps the healthiest perspective is not to insist on one model of sleep, but to recognize the spectrum of possibilities. Biphasic patterns, segmented nights, consolidated blocks, all may be natural under the right conditions. The science suggests that what matters most is not rigid adherence to one form, but alignment with circadian rhythms, sufficient total sleep, and respect for the body's signals. In the end, whether we sleep in one stretch or two, whether we nap in the afternoon or rise briefly in the night, the purpose is the same: to restore, to dream, to renew the fragile machinery of mind and body. Modern research, with its electrodes and laboratory charts, has given us maps of this process, but it has also quietly confirmed something our ancestors lived without diagrams or data: that sleep is many-shaped, that it bends to nature, and that within its cycles lie both health and mystery. Sleep has always been more than a biological function. It is a story stretching from ancient nights under starlight to our modern bedrooms lit by quiet screens. Science helps us understand its rhythms, its phases, its chemistry, but there remains something timeless and human in the way we surrender to it, dream through it, and wake renewed. As you listen now, perhaps you'll notice your own rhythms more closely, the way you drift into sleep, the moments when you stir in the night, the dreams that linger in the morning. These patterns connect you with generations before, with ancestors who prayed, worked, and dreamed under the same turning sky. So let the night take you gently. Rest in the knowledge that sleep carries both mystery and memory, and that each breath draws you deeper into its quiet embrace. The fire fades, the night continues,